Today, I'm going to share with you how to choose the best car for you as a real estate agent. We're going to cover the following topics: whether you should use cash or get a payment, if you should buy versus lease, new versus used, whether you should get a luxury car or a standard vehicle. We'll talk about having a car versus an SUV, if you should consider an electric or a hybrid versus a gas vehicle. And then I'm going to give you my top 10 picks for vehicles as a real estate agent. And we're going to start all of this right now. What's going on, everybody? Kyle Handy here, and I am a real estate agent out of San Antonio, Texas. I've been in the business for about 12 years now. Today, I lead an expansion team across the nation of over 300 agents, and I use YouTube to be able to share my message and talk about things that I've learned over my career as a real estate agent. If you're new to the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button down below and hit the bell icon next to it so you get notified whenever I come out with a new video each and every week. Also, make sure to hit that like button if you're getting value out of this video. All right, that being said, let's jump right in. So let me give you a real brief background and kind of tell you where I'm at today with my vehicle choices. I added it up the other day, and over 16 years of being able to drive, I've had over 17 vehicles. So I do feel like I'm qualified to talk about this subject here with you today. I've owned everything from a Honda Civic to a Ford F-150 to a Lexus to now a Tesla and even a Corvette and a Dodge Viper at some point in my career of being a real estate agent. Because of this, I've been able to gather a lot of insight, and I've actually made a lot of mistakes that I'm going to share with you and hope that it helps you to not take the same path as what I've done. So first off, let's talk about payment versus cash. I am a huge advocate for buying your vehicle, especially when you're just getting into the real estate business, with cash. Being a real estate agent is very inconsistent with your income, especially in the beginning, and a lot of money you're going to want to put into your marketing and advertising up front to help kickstart your business. Having a car payment is seriously going to hinder the amount of money that you can invest into your business if you're making a $500 a month car payment. Now, once you have a proven track record of success inside of real estate and you're earning some money consistently, if you choose to go out there and get a lease payment or a car payment, that's up to you based on what you like. But again, if you're a brand new agent, you're not really making any money, I would highly advise you against getting any kind of a car payment and trying to find whatever car that you can purchase cash within your budget. When I first got started in real estate, my first vehicle was a Ford F-150. It was paid off, I had no car payment, and it wasn't until about 4 years after I had started making some consistent commission checks that I actually went out and got my first car payment. Now, if you decide that getting a car payment is right for you, the next decision you have to make is, are you going to lease or are you going to own that vehicle? What I've found, and in general the consensus seems to be, is the more expensive the vehicle you decide to get, the more advantageous a lease can become into your business, especially with taxes and things like that. However, that's not the only consideration you have to make. Most leases will have a mileage limit, so you have to know how much you're driving. On average, I would drive around 12,500 to 15,000 miles per year, but you certainly could be different. I know agents that drive 20 and 30,000 miles a year. I also know some that don't hardly drive anything, maybe 5 to 10,000 miles a year. So you have to consider that when you're getting into a lease. The other thing you have to consider is your track record with vehicles. Are you like me and you switch out a car every year to a couple years? Or do you typically keep your vehicles until they're basically junk and not worth a whole lot? Now, the other thing to consider is that lease payments are typically going to be lower than monthly payments on your car loan for the same vehicle, as far as taking the standard deduction versus itemized deduction for your auto expenses. However, the one main big difference between purchasing a vehicle is on depreciation. One thing to note is that as you start to get more and more expensive on vehicles and into the luxury category, the amount you can take off for depreciation starts to shrink. This is why, in general, leasing, especially as you start to get more and more expensive, starts to become more advantageous. Now, as another side note, there is something called Section 179 depreciation, which applies to vehicles with over a 6,000 pound gross weight. So if you're getting something like a large SUV, a truck, you may be better off purchasing in that case. Definitely consult with your CPA and make sure that if you're going down this route, you know what your options are. All right, so next let's move over to new versus used. Now, the most important thing about a vehicle in your real estate business is that it be reliable. Now, ideally, I recommend a vehicle that's 5 years or newer. Additionally, you should look for vehicles that have around 60,000 miles or less. And then in most situations, what I would advise agents is that you look for a car that's in good condition and very clean. In many scenarios, having a car that's just in good condition and clean will be just as advantageous as having a luxury vehicle. vehicle. This leads me to my next point about luxury versus standard. As real estate agents, we feel like we need to have to present an image to our potential client that's either going to be favorable or give us an advantage when picking up new clients. Sometimes we may think that having a luxury vehicle gives us that advantage. What I would say about this is look to your average vehicle in your area. Like for instance, in San Antonio, driving around a Honda Accord would be just fine. However, if you're in Los Angeles or Miami and the average maybe bumps up a bit, you might need to step up a little bit and just fit in with the average. I truly believe that going over the top and having something that's extremely nice for your area is not necessarily an advantage for your business. Let me put it this way. It may help, but I've also known a bunch of agents, including myself, that have been very successful driving an average vehicle around for real estate. Now, I will say that as of today, I love vehicles. And so I don't mind spending a little bit more on myself because I do tend to be in a vehicle quite often. So I like to drive what I like to drive. And that's why I've purchased a Tesla Model S. And I'll share a little bit more about that side of it a little bit later. I also just want to point out one thing that I think is important to note, especially for newer agents. It's the fact that a lot of times you buy a car thinking that you're going to be driving your clients around all the time. This simply hasn't been the case in my business. For every 10 clients that I'm out showing properties to, I would say about one of them will usually get into my vehicle. I usually set the expectations up front that whenever we go and tour properties, the clients are going to drive their own vehicle and follow behind me. This tends to be the most comfortable for your client. However, if that's not the most comfortable, or if you don't want that to be the experience you give for your buyer and you'd rather them drive with you, then consider that when you're purchasing a vehicle. But again, to reiterate the point about having a good, clean vehicle, I think that, your vehicle gives a perception of you as an agent, and that's where having a clean, good condition vehicle can be more important than having a luxury vehicle or something like that. All right, now the next suggestion deals with having a car versus an SUV or a truck. I've owned all three types of vehicles as I've been doing real estate and have found that I typically tend to go towards the car segment. Now again, this is just my preference. I do like to have a somewhat smaller vehicle just whenever I'm driving around, parking in front of homes and in driveways and things like this. It's easier to be able to park and maneuver with a smaller vehicle. I've had a pickup truck and I've had an SUV, and although it hasn't stopped me from doing business, it just sometimes gets to be a little bit more cumbersome to have to get in and out and be moving it around streets and things like that when it's easier just to have a car. Now, if you like to sit up a little bit higher, or if you're working in rural areas where you're constantly out on like farm roads and things like that, sometimes you may want to pick up a bigger vehicle. Now, when I say a smaller vehicle, I'm not talking about just like a two-door vehicle or like a super small compact sedan. Ideally, a mid-size sedan to a larger sedan is good, not necessarily because you're going to be driving people around all the time, but when you do, it's nice to have a little bit extra room. Plus, there's always going to be random things that you got to put in your car, and having a little bit extra space is nice. All right, last topic before I give you my picks for the top vehicles for real estate agents. And that topic's a newer one. It's electric versus hybrid versus gas vehicles for real estate. Now, this is going to seem odd coming from a Tesla owner, but I would recommend gas in most situations. Now, with the exception of maybe owning a Tesla Model 3 or a Toyota Prius as the hybrid, gas is going to give you more options as far as which vehicles to choose from. However, if you've already considered everything that I've already shared with you and you're thinking still that, hey, maybe getting a Tesla Model 3 would be something that you'd want to do, I certainly wouldn't talk you out of it. Owning a Tesla has been one of my favorite vehicles that I've owned. Now, most of the times you have to be willing to get a car payment, or you are going to plop down some good cash because a Tesla Model 3 starts in kind of the low 40s range. But some of the advantages include that I don't have to go and get as much maintenance as you would with a gas vehicle. I've owned my Tesla for over 2 years now, and I've never had to take it into a shop, which is very nice. Now, as we're going into 2021, most of the tax credits for electric vehicles are almost gone. However, if you still are comparing an electric vehicle like a Tesla Model 3 to an actual gas vehicle, what I would say is that you could probably take about $7,000 to $8,000 off the price of the electric vehicle to compensate for the lower maintenance and the lower gas that you're going to pay year over year. So that $43,000 Tesla Model 3 is more equivalent to like a $36,000, $37,000 gas vehicle. Now, the reason why I say in most situations owning a gas vehicle is more desirable is just because of the fact that you have to be willing to spend that amount of money or pick up a car payment to be able to get an electric vehicle, because you can't really pick up a used electric car for $8,000 or $6,000 or something like that. Now, as far as hybrids go, and I am pretty in tune with that market, there's not very many hybrids that I would recommend over an actual gas vehicle, with the exception of something like a Toyota Prius. Again, this isn't the most fancy vehicle out there, and it's definitely a polarizing vehicle for some, and it's also not really the largest sedan that you could get, but it is a very economical vehicle. When you look up a lot of the reports as far as the best vehicle you can get for dollars per mile, the Toyota Prius typically is on the top of those lists. Outside of that, most other hybrids typically tend to be more expensive long run compared to their gas counterparts. All right, so let me give you my top 10 recommendations for vehicles for real estate agents. So what I'm using here as far as giving you pricing on these vehicles is I always go to Car Gurus. That's kind of the best website I've found, especially compared to like Auto Trader and things like that, because it gives you a lot of price suggestions that I feel are pretty accurate that will help you in your decision to buy a new vehicle. Once you've selected a make and model, I always go to the left-hand side, filter it by great and good deals only. I also search within a 500-mile radius, and then I sort it by the best deals first. So in doing that, let's start with that Toyota Prius that I talked about as far as the hybrid option. New, these vehicles go for around $24,000, so it's a significant savings over something like a Tesla Model 3. Still not super cheap by any means, but for a new vehicle, when you compare that to gas counterparts, it's certainly going to save you a lot of money in the long run. So it's kind of your best bang for the buck vehicle if you really don't care too much about having something super luxurious and you're okay with just kind of the average car and even the way that it kind of looks. Now, if you're going to stick with what I talked about first in buying a vehicle cash, you can also find a slightly used Toyota Prius for a significant savings. For instance, I did a search and I found a 2013 SE for around $8,500 with 100,000 miles. Now, again, that does go over the 60,000 mile recommendation, but if you're trying to buy a vehicle cash and you only have about $8,000, $6,000 to spend, chances are you're going to have to get something with a few more miles on it. But in my opinion, if you look up that vehicle's history and if everything looks good and you've seen the vehicle in person, it checks out and looks clean, that still may be a reasonable buy. Now, if you're looking to spend a little bit more money, I've also found a 2015 for about $14,000 with 40,000 miles. Now, moving on up into size, and these are gas vehicles, as far as a mid-size sedan, what I would recommend is to look into either a Honda Accord, a Ford Fusion, or a Toyota Camry. I've got to admit, the newer Honda Accord and newer Toyota Camrys, starting from about 2018 and on up, have really impressed me. I think they look nice, they get a lot of great reviews from Car and Driver and other sources like that, and they're certainly reasonably priced. New, a Honda Accord and Toyota Camry are going to be a little bit more expensive than the Ford Fusion. On average, they're around $25,000 new, whereas the Ford Fusion is going to be in the lower $20,000 range. But used, if you just find a slightly used Accord or Camry, you're looking at roughly about $20,000. I found a 2018 Toyota Camry XSE for around $19,500 with about 58,000 miles. In addition, I've also found a 2019 Honda Accord for about $21,000 with only 6,000 miles. But if again, you're trying to buy a vehicle cash, these are still three great vehicles that you could look into that are well under $10,000 because they've been making these vehicles for such a long time that yes, you might not get the newest, the 2018 body style and all that, but they're still reliable cars that have a great track record over a long period of time. For instance, I found a 2008 Honda Accord LX for about $6,500 with 92,000 miles. Additionally, I found a 2009 Toyota Camry for about $5,500 with 120,000 miles. Now, these cars aren't going to be super flashy, but as long as you find a clean body that's been well taken care of, it could certainly be great for just getting into real estate and starting to pick up your book of business until you do have consistent closings and can upgrade your vehicle. All right, so next up, let's talk about SUVs. First off, let's start with the small SUV section. I think the best vehicle in this segment would be the Mazda CX-5. These have been around for a little while now, so even though the newer ones look really nice and they're very sporty and actually have a lot of technology inside of them, even some of the older ones are still going to be really desirable cars if you're looking for something a little bit bigger than a sedan, but you don't need a huge SUV. So for instance, I found a 2014 CX-5 for under $10,000 with around 100,000 miles. Now, if you can spend a little bit more for about $19,000, you can find a 2017 for around $20,000 with only around 45,000 miles. Now, a little bit bigger than that, and it's getting a lot of great awards now, is the Hyundai Santa Fe. Now, 10 years ago, if you would have told me about a Hyundai, I would have probably said no, absolutely not, but they're starting to get a better reputation. And for this segment, kind of that mid-size SUV, not the huge SUVs like the Expeditions and the Tahoes, but not super small either. This is kind of that bridge in between, this is getting a lot of good marks, especially the newer ones. I was able to find a 2019 for around $21,500 with only about 20,000 miles. Going back to 2014, I was able to find a limited that was only $13,000 for about 65,000 miles. Now moving up from that, you're getting into the large SUVs. This is where you're going to need something like a Ford Expedition or a Chevy Tahoe. I wouldn't recommend anything this big unless your daily life, something else other than real estate kind of warrants it. If you've got a lot of kids, you're traveling around or something like that. But if that's the case, I'll give you my preference, which honestly, I'm a Ford person. I like the Ford Expedition. My wife drives a Lincoln Navigator. We love it. It's basically built on the same platform as the Ford Expeditions. And in 2018, when they changed the body style, it looks really nice. It comes with a lot of great features, and it has the EcoBoost engine, so it's not super terrible on gas for a large SUV, and it still has a ton of power. New, these will run you anywhere from about $50,000 to around $70,000, depending on which trim that you get and which options you get. However, for like a 2019, you can get something for around 35,000 miles for about $36,000, so some significant savings there on those large SUVs. Additionally, I was able to find a 2015, which is a little bit older body style, but they still look nice, for around $18,200 with about 90,000 miles. I honestly wouldn't go too much older than that or too many more miles on an SUV than that. Sometimes they get pretty worn down, and it can definitely be a lot more maintenance and upkeep in the long run, because large SUVs are already going to be kind of the most expensive and costly vehicles. So realistically, unless you just have a lot of money to spend on a vehicle, I wouldn't be looking at kind of the bottom of the barrel segment of large SUVs if you really wanted to get into that market. All right, so now let's get into the luxury segment. So this is, of course, my personal favorite style of vehicle. However, I wouldn't, again, advise these right up front in your early real estate career, or even long term if that's just not something you really desire, is to have a nice luxury vehicle. Certainly, again, not necessary to sell a lot of real estate. It's more of just a preference of how you like to kind of drive around, if it's, important to you to have a luxury vehicle. But that being said, the first one that I'm going to talk about is the Tesla Model 3. I think this is a great vehicle. It may not be super luxury compared to the Tesla Model S. However, it's still an expensive vehicle. They run around low 40s, but I think what's cool about them, they offer so many features and they're just a ton of fun to drive. Now, the one thing I'll say about getting a Tesla, especially like a Model 3, is make sure if you're doing real estate, you're going to want to get the long range version. So that way you have an upgraded battery. Typically, the long range Model 3 can go about 320 miles on a charge. In ideal situations, realistically, you're probably going to see closer to about 260, maybe 270 miles if you go with the long range option. So anything less than that, and you're going to get even less miles. And so I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, in my Model S, it goes about 250 miles in ideal situations. But again, I usually get about 200 to 210 for a full charge. And realistically, and there have been some days that I've used pretty close to all 200 miles, or I've even had to stop in the middle of my day to stop at a supercharging station to kind of fill up the charge a little bit. It can be a little inconvenient, but it definitely is more convenient than having to stop at gas stations all the time and do a ton of maintenance on the vehicle. And again, if you're kind of that techie person, it's a fun car to have. There's so much technology that they put in them. They're constantly updating. So I will wake up in the morning and there'll be an update pushed out to the vehicle. Just love it. Not to mention, it's also a conversation starter. When you do pull up, it's not so much about the wow factor. It's just the fact that they're unique vehicles. A lot of times clients will ask about it. They remember me because I've got a Tesla. And so it's a pretty cool vehicle in that sense. Now, for kind of your more traditional luxury vehicle, and especially recently, I do actually really like the Lexus ESs. For a while, I didn't really like the style, but now they've really come out. They look really nice. I mean, the Lexus GS is obviously nice too, but it's a bit more expensive and kind of unnecessary. I think the ES is a good mid-size sedan. It's a luxury vehicle. They got a lot of features into it. And I found a 2019 with only about 27,000 miles for about $33,000. So that's the biggest difference with like a Tesla and a Lexus, is the fact that even the Tesla Model 3s, the used versions are still going for pretty close to the new versions. And so I would just recommend you getting a new Tesla Model 3 if that's what you wanted to do. However, if you go to the Lexus, you can save anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 on a used version that's slightly used versus buying new. Now, in the luxury segment for like an SUV, something that's a little smaller SUV, but still luxury, I really like the Porsche Macan. They've got a GTS and a turbo version, which if that's that's your thing, you like a lot of speed and kind of the extra features, then yeah, those are nice, but even just the base Macan is pretty nice. New, they run around $61,000, but and that's the thing with luxury vehicles is you're typically going to take more depreciation on them. And so realistically, if you're purchasing versus leasing a vehicle, it could be more advantageous to buy something that's a couple years old. I found like a 2018 all-wheel drive for around $41,000 with only 26,000 miles. Now I have owned Tesla, I have owned Lexus, I've not owned a Porsche, but one of the things that I will say that you also need to be aware of is the maintenance long term. Again, Tesla, I've had it for 2 years, never had to spend anything on maintenance. I bought it from the day and I haven't spent another dime on it since, outside of the time that I hit a pothole and blew out 2 of my tires, but that's not really the fault of my vehicle. And on the Lexus side of things, it's a Japanese vehicle, so even the maintenance when I had my Lexus, it wasn't actually that expensive. I mean, it's more expensive than just your standard vehicle, but it's still compared to like a Porsche or a Mercedes or a BMW, tends to be a bit cheaper. All right, well, that's it. So again, you know, the overall theme that I want to get across as far as buying a vehicle for real estate is the fact that you don't need something over the top. You know, I know that a lot of people say, oh, your image, when you pull up and you got this vehicle, it's going to make you look super successful. But at the same time too, sometimes that can rub some people the wrong way. And so just really kind of depends on your market. But that being said, if you just kind of stand in the middle of what your average is in your area, it's not going to hurt or help you really in your business. But what will help you is the fact that if you're not going and overextending yourself and getting a super expensive car payment or just paying way too much for a vehicle cash, you'll be able to use that savings to really jumpstart your real estate business and not be so worried about your car payment that you got to make every month. Instead, you can reinvest that money into Google ads or Facebook ads or something like that that's really going to move the needle for you and your business. Just make sure that whatever you get, it's reliable and it's clean and in good condition, because I think if you just do that, you're not going to lose any business from having an ordinary car. But now I want to hear from you. So if you made it this far, you're part of the 1% crew, put that in the comments below and tell me what kind of car do you drive for your real estate business. I'm curious. And let me know too if you actually like that vehicle or if you're thinking about selling it and why, because I think that it'll help other people who are reading through the comments to get a full picture as to what cars real estate agents drive. And again, if you haven't already done so, make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell notification so you get notified whenever I release a new video each week. And if you could help out that YouTube algorithm and hit that like button, I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, well, go out there and sell some homes and be well.